Okay, welcome back to True Eagle. After a few days, once again, of not uploading, forgive me, the end of the footy season meant that I've had to dedicate a fair bit of time to True Footy, but I have mapped out a little bit of a season review for the West Coast Eagles in 2024. There's a few different ways to do this. I mean, one way I could do it is just relentlessly pick apart the season with dot points in positives and negatives. I've done a little bit of that. I don't know how worthwhile that is, so I kind of want to take a bit of a broader view on this, certainly to start. I have got some stats. I know that not all of you like stats. There's just a little bit of that. Some positives, some negatives that are fairly high level and broad. Some concerns going forward, and a little look to next year, a bit of an outlook on what to expect next season from us, where the improvement might come from, a little bit of talk about trade and draft as well. So now that I've had time to digest the end of the season, which I have to say was a very disappointing final fortnight, and look at the season holistically, I'm trying to get a feel for how I felt about season 2024. So what were our expectations going into this year? My expectation, speaking for myself, was that we would inevitably see an improvement from this football team with a better run of injuries. Because, I'm sure we haven't all forgotten, over the last 2 years, we've sustained an injury run that I don't think has ever been seen in the AFL before. And we just were a mess, obviously. So I thought, with a good preseason, which we had a relatively strong preseason, with a clean run of health to a lot of key players, bearing in mind we did lose a few players that were injury prone last year, Shuey in particular, Nat Nui, and Hearn. You have to bear that in mind when you think senior players coming back, better injury run. Those guys were injury affected and they're not part of the list anymore. Nonetheless, I did think with some more consistency and maturity in our team, I predicted us to finish 17th on my ladder prediction at the start of the year, ahead of North Melbourne. And we technically exceeded that expectation. And you could make a point that, okay, this year we avoided losing a game by 100 points. We increased by 2 wins and our percentage went up by about 20%. I can't remember exactly what it was. Maybe it was like 15 to 17%. So on paper, that is an improvement, although I don't know if I find that overly satisfying. On the point of 100-point losses, well, we lost 2 games by 93 and 99 points rather. And we also probably should have had that more or less as a minimum expectation going into this year, given the cleaner run of injuries, right? So those on paper positives for me are not overly strong or compelling. I think, while I predicted us to finish 17th and we technically exceeded that, I can't help but feel, as a West Coast fan, I probably was still expecting this season to go a little bit better. And maybe not necessarily translating in wins and losses, but over the course of the season, our best football was very good. We just didn't see it very often at all. And, there's inconsistent, but then there's our best form only coming out once in a blue moon. First 10 rounds of the season, we're looking pretty good. It took us a little while to work into it. I was fairly calm when the first 3 rounds ended up in one-sided losses because I couldn't help but compare it to what we'd seen last year, and I knew that there would be some teething issues, some growing pains to some extent, with a team adapting to a new style and a lot of players that didn't have synergy. I know that's a bit of a buzzword with West Coast, but a lot of those players hadn't played a lot of footy together, and I knew that there would be some time taken to adapt. So the first 3 rounds were all one-sided, and I thought, well, we're trying hard, and I will take that for now. Sure enough, round 4 against Sydney, we played really well in gather round. I think we're up at half-time and within touching distance, I think about 15 points down at three-quarter time. Sydney being the team that they were, and maybe are still, that is a pretty damn good effort. And, you could tell by the way we played, there was a spirit in that team that we hadn't seen in a long time. Sure enough, round 5 comes around, we belt Richmond, we look far too good for them, the Western Derby happens, and we're genuinely playing really good footy. I like to keep bringing this up because it hasn't been a good year otherwise, but we were 64 points up at three-quarter time in the Western Derby, and I would say playing some of the best footy we've played since the COVID-affected season. 2021, I'm a little blurry on how well we actually played in the first half of that year, but I would say in terms of entertainment value, we at least matched our best football in 2021 with our best footy in 2024. Then there's, a couple of away losses. I think a big loss to Collingwood, in which I said I still felt confident about the way we were going at that point in time because of the way we were able to arrest Collingwood's momentum. I thought Collingwood played really well against us that day, and absolutely tore us apart. And sure enough, that optimism was not, completely misguided, because the following week we torched Melbourne at Optus Stadium. Harley Reid kicks what I hope is goal of the year, who knows. Jake Waterman's in the form of his life, and things are looking good in the sense that we were playing a level of football which I didn't expect from us. And not consistently, but often enough to think, oh God, there actually might be something here. So to then, return after that game and go to Adelaide Oval, lose by 99 points, which as far as I'm concerned is a 100-point loss. And then, have a lackluster home loss against St Kilda, in which we didn't play well. St Kilda didn't play well, to be honest, either. They've ended up becoming a much better side in the final 2 months of the year. The North Melbourne game was horrendous, and such was my confidence that I tipped North Melbourne in that game, and we ended up losing by 9 points, and then just continued on this long period of malaise. And I suppose I would say that I'm very disappointed with us being able to return to that terrible level. I would probably compare it to the back end of 21. It was just hopeless, and no doubt the effort intensity was off, the skills were off, and I found that incredibly disappointing. And I suppose my views on Adam Simpson this year more or less fluctuated with the boards. First 10 rounds, things are going well. I pretty much kind of changed my tune on him more or less when it came out that the Eagles were considering replacing him. And sure enough, we lose him at the end of, I'm not even too sure, the second round after the bye. We played Hawthorn, got belted. We played Melbourne, got belted. I think any year in which you lose your senior coach, it's hard to be able to reflect on that season as a success. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there that thinks that losing Simpson was the right thing and therefore it's a positive. And in a way, the way we've fallen away so hard has inspired aggressive change. Probably haven't seen a lot of. I think we've been conservatively aggressive or cautiously aggressive, if that's a word. What am I trying to say here? Controlled aggression with our list turnover. A lot of it has happened to us with players retiring. In some cases we've tried to generate more picks and had some success with that. But now, new CEO and now new senior coach, new list manager. The one bright spot from losing the coach is that it has inspired a heap of change that hopefully reaps some rewards. But of course, there's a risk in making large-scale changes like this. It might not actually work. We've seen it time and time again with clubs in particular over East. But going back to the point about this season, and I think we hit a point this year where we were far below expectation. And with a cleaner injury run, I am disappointed that we hit those lows once again. Now we change the coach, Schofield comes in, and we have a little bit of a sugar hit. And to what extent is that a sign of long-term improvement? I mean, I don't know. I think you can see over time, there's been heaps of cases where interim coaches come in and they see a little bit of success. It's a very common phenomenon in the AFL. So I don't know what to make of that. We did put up some very good performances though. I mean, to get within 2 goals of the Brisbane Lions in Schofield's first game was a solid effort. We looked pretty good in the Derby. We were 3 goals up at one point right before half time. And then obviously a couple of wins, a last gasp win over the Gold Coast Suns and North Melbourne. Now, those wins showed character, particularly the Gold Coast game. I think we showed an unwillingness to lose. And against North Melbourne, it felt more like North Melbourne stopped and we capitalised, and perhaps spurred on by the belief of the previous week, we were able to put scores on the board very quickly and win. And that is great. I don't want to take too much away from that, other than to acknowledge we didn't particularly play well for most of that game. And then it felt like the boys checked out. There's no doubt about that. I thought in our last home game of the year against Carlton, we would, not be pathetic. And I was wrong. We were absolutely pathetic. And we carried that into the Geelong game to trail by 100 points at halftime. We were a very young team that day, but there's still a lot of senior bodies in this team that, routinely drop off. So that is where we currently sit. And I think there is a somewhat of a bitterness for me about the way we've ended this season, bearing in mind, I know that by the round 1 next year, it'll be long forgotten. It's interesting to reflect, how would we feel about this season had you flipped the first half and the second half of the seasons around? Let's say we'd started really poorly mid-year, get slapped by Carlton, get slapped by Geelong, certainly would have lost that coach in that instance as well. And then in the second half of the year, smash Richmond, smash Fremantle, smash the Demons towards the back end of the year. We'd probably be feeling like we were on an upward trajectory, right? But the reality is that's not the case, and it was a fairly bitter end to the season for me personally. Now, I've been following footy long enough, and West Coast Eagles long enough to know that's how you end a season doesn't really indicate what's a sign of things to come. Like, I keep going back to our last rebuild because I remember it quite well. But 2009, we ended the year winning 4 of our last 5, and we thought, maybe we were on an upward trajectory. We were terrible the next year, won the wooden spoon. Finished 2010 really poorly, and sure enough, come out in 2011 and make the top 4. So it's not necessarily indicative of what's to come. But I suppose to tie up the point about whether this was a successful year, I don't know how we're supposed to measure success given where we're at the moment. I am relieved that we won more games than last year, and all of those presented good memories. The beltings got fewer. I'm going to still say we more or less lost 2 games by 100 points. I don't think there's too much to be taken out of the fact that we avoided a 100-point loss by, single digits. But while that is good, I still think I was hoping for less pathetic performances this year, which we did not get. So another way to measure success is how much growth we got. And I think other than the obvious Harley Reid and absolutely Jake Waterman breaking out to being, a bit of a superstar at times this year, individual growth was probably a little bit harder to see, but still nonetheless there. And we debuted some young kids that I think will play at AFL level going forward. And over the stretch, particularly towards the back end of the year, they did get some valuable experience. So there's something to be taken from that. Big transitional year for us. I don't know if I consider it a success, but certainly there is progress to be made even in years where things don't go so well. So I look at North Melbourne right now, and I think they've made the most progress they've made in a single season in any of the last 4 years. And yet I think they had the same premiership points this year and 8% less. And yet I think they made progress. So it's not always about that, but we will get into other things we got out of this year. First of all, I want to talk about a little bit about stats. Okay, just some skimming off the top sort of stuff. We were horrendously bad for inside 50 differential last year, distantly last. We moved up to 16th, and that reflects our ladder position. We were dead last in contested ball, which is supposed to be our A game. Far too, I don't even want to say inconsistent. I just want to say we were very good in contested ball once in a blue moon, but consistently poor around that. Dead last in uncontested ball. Once the ball left the stoppage this year, we were very, very poor at A, using the footy, and B, stopping the opposition using the footy. 8th in ground ball gets is something that's quite good. I feel like this is something we're really poor at towards the back end of our premiership window. Well, I don't know why I use quotation marks, but I suppose I was broadly considering 2020, 2021, even though, we didn't make the top 4 in either of those years. 18th in pressure rating as well, which, that's kind of startling. I think over the last 6 weeks under Schofield, that stat did get a lot better. I'm sure it wasn't great against Carlton or Geelong, though. At the start of season 2024, I made a video. It was one of the first videos on this channel called The Stat West Coast Need to Improve in 2024. We were distantly, historically bad for scores from stoppage differential. We at least moved up to 16th in that stat. So, part of that is having Harley Reid. There's no doubt he had an impact in terms of clearances. He won heaps of clearances this year. For an 18-year-old mid, that was great, or 19. And of course, as well, the fitness of Elliot Yeo made a big impact this year in getting a little bit better at that. He consistently won clearances. So did Tim Kelly, even in games they weren't playing that well. We were also the worst hit-out team by far. And this, I think, really gave our midfield, it was kind of like fighting with one arm tied behind your back a little bit. There's no doubt Bailey Williams, in particular, took a step back this year. Let's gloss over some positives and then some negatives, and then we'll talk a little bit about the outlook for next season. So I loosely wrote down the 100-point loss thing. I don't feel super attached to that as a positive. However, we did move up the ladder and we gained nearly 20% or something like that. So that is improvement, although like I said, I'm not taking too much out of that. But there's more genuine ones. We won a Western Derby and clapped them. That was super satisfying. Amazing win. Harley Reid, as a positive, I think he exceeded my expectations. Played very much as a midfielder this year, which I didn't expect. Pre-season I was saying, do we play him forward? Do we play him back? Simo and company backed him as a midfielder, and he exceeded my expectations. And his tank was better than I thought it was going to be. I think he worked on that in his pre-season. Just think about what this guy could be like after a full pre-season at AFL level, because he's only had a mini one. Jake Waterman, probably the biggest shining light out of this year. To have a guy in that middle 20s age bracket become All-Australian squad quality, that is a huge positive. We already know about Jake Waterman. Unbelievable, and I love how loyal he is and how much he wants to be a part of West Coast improvement. Jeremy McGovern was a huge factor this year. Worthy All-Australian candidate should he make it. Huge improvement. Some other individuals, I want to highlight Jack Williams as being one of our most improved, along with Brady Hoff. To consider where they were at the start of the season to now, massive difference. Brady Hoff in particular has become a very accomplished defender. Again, reputation is lagging behind performance. There's no way he's not in the 22 under 22. But anyway, every team says that about their players, but I think Brady Hoff was a genuine miss there. Yo did his job. Not so sure about TK this year. I think that even in games where Kelly didn't play so well, I do note that he was still winning contested ball, still winning clearances, but his radar was shocking this year, and it hurt us, absolutely. Still think he's trying hard, but I really would hope to see an improvement out of TK. But anyway, this is meant to be the positives. I think Yo came in and did exactly what we would expect a 30-year-old version of Yo to do. Pretty much best case scenario. At times, like when we were winning games earlier in the year, he was an All-Australian smoky. He fell away, and we can't really build our entire game plan around Elliot Yo, as much as it was tempting at the time. And then finally, the reasonable exposure to youth. So I'd say that, it was an acceptable level of exposure this year. Got younger as the season progressed. I think in our final game against Geelong, that was the youngest team this team has listed all year. And against St Kilda, probably would have been the second youngest. So that's good. Now, I didn't necessarily list every young player who improved this year. I mean, we could talk about Jinby. I've got another little bit I want to talk about later on. I'm going to gloss over some negatives as well. It appears that we played, I think, the least amount of top 8 sides this year. So we got a little bit lucky there when you consider North Melbourne played, I think, significantly more top 8 sides and also had a run of form where they were almost beating them. So that probably inflated our ladder position a little bit. Again, I think we spent a good 9-10 weeks there as the worst form side in the competition. So that kind of underscores my negativity on that. We didn't beat a single side who was playing finals this year. As funny as it was to see Fremantle miss, it means that we didn't beat a single finalist this year. The next point I put is inconsistent doesn't tell the story. Like I said, it felt like when we played well this year, we were absolutely on fire. Absolutely at 100% capacity. And, in certain games, we smashed the opposition. But we did it so rarely that I couldn't even call us inconsistent. I'd say we were consistently bad, and the outlier was when we played well this year, which is unfortunately. The tendency to still have diabolical losses is a huge negative. Like, when West Coast is getting pumped, memes start getting shared because of how poor we are. And save for North Melbourne's final fortnight, they didn't really do that much. This seems to be a bit of a West Coast thing. Even Richmond had 2 big losses in the middle of the year, but around that, were able to stay with sides a lot better when they were off than we were. And the final negative I put, and I've summarised all these points really, but has our improvement equated with injury improvement? And I would say probably not. Probably not. Our best football was certainly far better than anything we've shown in the last 2 years, absolutely. But it was so uncommon for us to do that I think ultimately our tendency to still just fall asleep with the amount of experience we had in most games this year was very disappointing. I'll lift off some concerns going forward. I think finding a fourth midfielder behind Yo, Kelly and Reid is a must-have next year because Yo was pretty resilient this year in terms of his body. Kelly missed a few games. Reid missed a couple with suspension. But other than that, we had a pretty good run with availability there, and yet still no fourth clear midfielder. In terms of centre bounce attendances, the fourth most regular midfielder was Ruben Jinby, and that was only 34% of centre bounces. He has now also been moved to defence. Liam Duggan played a fair bit in there. That was only about 21%, as it turns out. I think this is a must fix, absolutely. Now, I'm hoping, it comes from someone like an Elijah Hewitt, maybe Jack Hutchinson, perhaps, but this is going to be a concern going forward. Ball use and composure. Look, we did say pre-season we wanted to focus on pressure, contest, and playing front half footy. And I think our pre-season was therefore much more focused on those elements of the game and not so much around ball use because it felt like we didn't practice skills much this pre-season. I'm okay with that considering the low base we came from this year. But ball use and composure, had we been better in that this year, well, I think our percentage would be better. Consistency of contest, absolutely. The consistency piece around how much we win the ball in dispute is poor. I've already touched on that. We have no plan B this year if we didn't win contested ball. Sometimes teams, when they're losing contested ball, can still mitigate the opposition through structure or perhaps pressure. It felt like if we weren't winning the ball in dispute, we were just getting rolled, absolutely rolled, which we know. Key back depth. As I recall this, Tom Barras has officially requested a trade to Hawthorn. We knew that was happening. So we need to brace for the prospect of having Harry Edwards, Rhett Bazzo, Jeremy McGovern, Callum Jamieson as our 4 key backs next year. I think we need to draft one, absolutely. And when you consider Jeremy McGovern may or may not stay fit, like this year was a relatively fit year for Jeremy McGovern. He still had some horrendous injuries. So I'd say recruiting one is important. Maybe a mature age option for depth and drafting one for sure. So I had a whole section here for where will the improvement come from next year. And I'll summarize it briefly for you because I realize this video is going along and it could be its own video. But on the plus side, we have a number of players who are now within 20 games of getting to 50 games. A general sort of principle that I at least acknowledge without, it's not a hard and fast rule, but the general idea is 50 games, you get to play to 50 games, that's when you see a big uplift in performance. So part of what we're trying to do here is get a number of key players to 50 games. So as of next year, we will see a number of players get close to this number. So I think we can get a lot of improvement, out of Oscar Allen playing a full season. Bailey Williams went backwards this year. He's at 72 games. I think there's a lot of upside to come out of Bailey Williams, just at least getting back to previous form. He has only just turned 24 recently, so there's still some upside and long-term growth there, so not ruling him out. But Jinby's played 40 games now. Jack Williams, 29. Ryan Marrick, 29. Noah Long's played 26. Harley Reid's now played 20. And then you got some guys like Hewitt and Hutchinson who have played less, but I think are both talented enough to be able to drive improvement in us next year. So I think that's where the group comes from. Again, this is worth a video in itself. Then we got some wild cards, some other question marks like Petruccelli at 88 games. Is he going to take his game to the next level? It's a big question mark at this point. I'm a little unconvinced by Tyler Brockman at this point. Campbell Chesser, has been a very slow burn. And I think when he has the ball in hand, he looks pretty good, but far from a sure thing at this point. Rat Bazzo, I expect to see at AFL level next year. I don't think he will drive improvement though, but he could be, within half a season, a big upgrade on someone like a Rotham or a Witherden. Then you got some guys who have played 12 games or less: Jai Cully, Harvey Johnson, Tyrell Dewar, Clay Hall, and of course our first round pick this year. So those guys are all chances to improve us next year, but for different reasons. They're either unlikely to make it in a big way or too young to probably make a big impact, but I will make a whole video out of this. So to summarize this season, I don't know if I'm going to consider it a success, but I think long-term when you look back, I don't think it's going to matter how many games we won this year. And ultimately, perhaps it was the failure to improve in a big way that has ultimately driven a significant amount of change in the football club. And hopefully that pays off. We're going to push hard towards youth. I really do think I'm leaning towards us holding our draft picks this year, not going for Jack Graham, and probably foregoing Liam Baker unless it's for pick 23. Again, we're going to make more trade and draft content, but I think looking at the draft this year, there's a lot of value to be had, and I think it's time we just put our chips into the draft. We've still got a lot of experience that can hold up the fort for now, but as for next year, with that all in mind, I'll be surprised if we improve next year in terms of ladder position. We're going to lose TB for a start. We had a relatively good run with injury. We're going to have a new coach. There's probably going to be some teething issues. I'm not going to put a cap on, I probably couldn't put a cap on what we're going to achieve. I'll be shocked if we play finals or anything like that. We certainly could improve, but I think there is still going to be this transitional period where we're getting a lot of young guys to 50 games as quickly as possible. So I'm not expecting us to shoot up the ladder, but what I would like to see is, if we lose a game heavily, I'd like to at least say, okay, we had a lot of youth in the team. Whereas this year, that has not been the case for a lot of it. So again, we'll talk about 2025, I'm sure, heaps as the off-season progresses. But for now, let me know in the comments what you thought of our season. I felt like this was more negative than I'd planned it, but I don't think, on the whole, it was a super pleasant season for us. While there were some good memories, there were also some lows, and a long period of feeling a little bit hopeless. But that'll do for now. Thank you for watching this video. Let me know in the comments what you think, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.